Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we tackle a single relevant question based on our Bible reading for that day. This week our reading is centered around the book of Romans, and today I'm joined by Alyssa Bream and Jay Rivenbark, and our question comes from Romans chapter 8. So verses 6, 7, and 8 say this. It says, "So letting your sinful nature control your mind leads to death, but letting the Spirit control your mind leads to life and peace. For the sinful nature is always hostile to God. It never did obey God's laws, and it never will. That's why those who are still under control of their sinful nature can never please God." So he says our sinful nature leads to death. No, letting our sinful nature control our mind leads to death. But letting the Spirit control our mind leads to life and peace. What role does our mind play in living a life of peace?
I think the mind, and maybe I'm wrong, and I'm fully willing to admit if you guys have a better argument than me. I think the mind is the only thing that creates or disturbs peace in our life. I think that any situation going around us, whether we are in the midst of utter turmoil or we are in a mansion in Hollywood, anywhere in between there, it's what your mind is doing, whether you're at peace or not. It doesn't matter the situation around you, because there are people that are, by all accounts of the world, they're rich, they have everything they want, and they are not at peace. And then there are people who live in war-torn countries who have peace because they accept their situation and they know, so I think the mind is the only thing that creates peace in our life.
When he talks about letting your sinful nature control your mind leads to death, I'm thinking how it extrapolates out. If I let my sinful nature, and that might be things like anger and fear and jealousy, pride, steals my peace, but it also brings about death. Say in a relationship, for instance, if the sinful nature is dominant with these characteristics, then it's controlling what I think and how I respond, people, then it can lead to a practical type of death that is absolutely void of peace. And so there's so many podcasts and books. I'm thinking of one, Battlefield of the Mind, because that's where everything starts, where it plays out. That's why the scripture has a lot to say about renewing the mind. Because as we think, we respond and we go, whether that's in a peaceful manner or non-peaceful manner.
Do you believe that the mind is the birthplace of all sin?
If it's not, it's the first filter it goes through. I'll say it that way. If it's not, then I think it's the first filter it goes through, because before you ever take an action, there's a thought. Some people would argue that, so no, I just responded. I didn't even have time to think about it. Well, something triggered the anger, the emotions that caused you to do what you did.
But I know there are instinctual responses they call fight or flight, those kind of things. But you have more experience than us with things like guns or being a law enforcement officer. There are things that you probably would do and it would not appear you weren't thinking about it, but you had trained your mind for it. It can't be an instinct unless you've trained it.
That's what I'm saying. But it's gone through the mind. It's been part of the process.
And I think that there are things that we do that are sinful, and we're like, well, I didn't even think about it. But they were, they were instinctual because we had trained our mind in that direction. We had.
And doesn't that go back to yesterday's podcast where you're a slave to sin because slaves don't have choices? And so if you feel like you don't have a choice and you made this instinctual, sinful action,
right?
I think it all ties together.
Or we say things like, "You make me."
Yeah.
or you bring out the worst in me, or whatever those statements are. We look to them, but I say frequently, it can't come out of you if it ain't in you. And so somewhere in the recesses of your mind, you've rehearsed that anger, you've held that bitterness, whatever it is that comes out at that particular moment, it's there because you've allowed it to stay there. And I will tell you, the times my mind is what keeps me from rest more than anything else.
Sure.
And when I'm going through a really stressful time, there are things that some of it you may know, some of it you may know. So when I'm going through a really stressful time, there are things that I notice. Obviously, it's often the last thing you think about when you go to sleep. First thing you think about when you wake up. It don't matter when you wake up, if it's 1 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning, it's the first thing on your mind. When your mind isn't occupied, it's playing, rehearsing in your brain. And I don't know all of the psychology of this, but those things, and I'm not even necessarily talking about sinful things right this minute, but those things, your mind has such an impact. So for me, there are 2 other things I notice when I'm under stress. I eat an enormous amount of food. Like I just want to eat all the time. It's like a nervous tick. I always want to be eating. And my family, my dad had his side of the family. His dad, his mom, him, all of his sisters have the same thing. I don't know what they're called. When it was my grandfather, we called it the palsy, but it's tremors, and my dad has tried taking medicine for it. What?
I know what you're going to say. He's tried. He's tried some.
The doctor had given him some medicine to try, but it had such side effects that he quit. And my grandfather, I would notice, his was almost uncontrollable. But when I get stressed out, a couple of weeks ago on a Sunday, I was preaching and I was so stressed, and I noticed I picked my hand up and it was just shaking. I was like, okay. And I had to move. I had to do something with my hand to get it still. But it starts here, And the thing that I would say about that, so that's how stress affects me. Sin is the same way. It has so many other effects on us. How we sleep, how we eat, all of those things. So if you don't sleep enough, right? It's hard to have peace. If you don't,
That's why I have an energy drink over here. I need some peace in my life.
if you're not taking care of your body, you're not eating right, it creates other havoc, that goes on. And so I don't think we realize the power of our mind, and the impact that it has on it. Most of the time, if I have, this isn't always true, but if I have like really wounded somebody verbally, I don't mean had a verbal scuffle, but if I have really wounded them, I had honed down that knife until I knew exactly what I was going to say and where I was going to place it. And when I did, I knew it was going to hurt. But it started here.
Sure did.
That's the truth of it. And I just think we don't realize things. I do believe it has, what we listen to has an impact on that. What we watch, what we read, the conversations that we have. Recently, I was listening to a neuroscientist talking about the impact of how you think on your brain. And he said, most people would tell you to think positively. And he said, the greatest thing you can do for yourself is to think less negative. That don't mean you necessarily think positive, but stop with the negative self-talk, because it just has such an impact on your brain. It starts there. And if my mind is at peace, I will have peace, right? I mean, because I can't have peace in my body and my mind be disrupted.
It's
I don't know if y'all can.
No, it's impossible to separate them.
I think, though, what I have found is sometimes trying to control, if you're stuck in a loop of negative thoughts or thinking about a situation or whatever, my mind, I can't go to my mind to fix it. I have to go to my body, and I have to do something productive, like going for a walk. There's like such scientific evidence that just walking with like the left, right, it helps your mind connect the two sides, and it helps calm you down in a lot of different ways. The breathings, there's lots of different breath things you can do to help, and those help. Your body and mind are so connected that we don't realize it. And like sometimes when I'm in my head and then I'm like, oh wow, my shoulders are tense and my jaw is clenched and all of this, and if I fix that, and then my mind can start to relax.
Yeah, I learned something a couple of weeks ago that I did not even know. My dentist told me you can bruise your teeth.
Bruise.
And I had bruised my teeth from clenching my jaw so much, a particular tooth. And I was having pain, and I said, I don't know if it's cracked. I got a bad feeling. He said, I think you can bruise them. And I didn't realize that, just, that tension does it, you clench that jaw, and it's dangerous, but I think our body instinctively knows that. So that's part of the reason why, like, I eat is stress eating. Is to try to divert my mind from what I'm stressed about. I walk my dog, and one of the things they say, like if a dog attack or they just hone in on something, he's more of a sniffer, but he gets down behind something. You got to divert their attention, give them a treat, so they're no different than us. Food changes their mind. And so how do you change your mind, Jay?
My wife changes my mind for me.
He's like, I've never changed my mind in my life. He's like, I've never changed my mind in my life. I've been right my whole life.
I tell you, one of the things is this practice of recognizing, I call triggers in your mind, whether it's stress points, whether it's anger points, whether it's issues with past persons, but things when they come into my mind is to recognize them or recognize an emotion, for instance, and say, okay, wait a minute, why am I feeling this? And it usually doesn't take me just moments to say the reality is this, it's not this. And once I can recognize those, then I can address that and change my behavior toward other people. And that's all a mind issue.
Right.
But for me, to your question, how do I change my mind, or what does that look like? Oftentimes that is the case. I start to feel uneasy, or my emotions start to come out in ways, and I'm like, wait a minute, what's the cause of this? And it has to take place.
Triggers are a real thing too.
They certainly are.
I don't think one of the greatest things you can do is be self-aware enough to know what your triggers are. Because if you don't, like, you'll be going off on people, and you have no idea why. You know?
That's right. And that's extremely frustrating when you behave in certain ways and you're like, I don't even know why I did that. But when you can start to recognize it in the mind and deal with it, and it's a much easier process if you can catch it up there before it manifests itself some other ways.
Well, thank you for joining us on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we continue our conversation around the book of Romans.